Welcome into the Why Wrong Fantasy Football Podcast. We're still in our divisional breakdowns. It is episode 24. We're going to be talking about the AFC South today. And you only have time to do one, but looking at the AFC South and AFC North, there's more names in the AFC South that I want you to talk about because I hate talking about the AFC North.
Fair enough.
So, our regular intro, I'm your monotone master. Brian is our fantasy force here. You can find us on social media, on TikTok and Instagram at Why You're Wrong FFB, and on Twitter as You're Wrong FFB. So we got some impactful news. Not really super impactful. It's just there's not really a lot of news to talk about. So an update on the Aaron Rodgers situation. Still the same. We're still waiting for something to happen. And Matt Nagy has come out and said the goal is to get David Montgomery 20 carries a game.
I saw that. And after watching that video of Montgomery saying that he is ready to take on full pads when they're not even allowed to put on pads and how he's going to be the workhorse of the season, it's definitely bumped his stock rating a little bit more in my eyes. However, he's not facing these easy defenses this season. So I don't know where to put him in my rankings, but I feel a little bit more confident about taking him if I have to take him in a draft this season.
Right. These two news stories don't really affect fantasy because they're on the defensive side of the ball, but Frank Clark is facing jail time for his second account of gun possession.
I mean, I haven't read too much into it, but I just see his name on Twitter. It's trending probably every other week, so it doesn't seem like it's a good scenario for him.
So right now, a story that has been blown up through memes, Richard Sherman has been arrested on charges of bullying, domestic violence, resisting arrest, and malicious mischief, as well as an alleged hit and run and DUI while driving through a construction zone.
I saw that yesterday, and I didn't read into it, but, Richard Sherman, that's your boy, so
yeah, so
you might want to put him into place.
I know, so I had to read into it because I had to be like, okay, what's going on? So I think it's people took the headline and ran with it, as they always do, but basically what happened was probably a little tipsy. He was just speeding through a construction zone. He basically just hit a barrier. He didn't hit another car.
Didn't it happen at 6 a.m. in the morning too?
Yes. Well, he basically hit the barrier around 1:30 in the morning. And so the whole arrest thing was he arrived early at his in-laws' house. And he just tried to get into the house. His wife said he didn't harm anyone. He wasn't trying to. The initial interaction between Sherman and the police was very relaxed, but once the police told him that they had probable cause to make an arrest, he tried walking away, and that's when it ended up into physical contact with the police. They sent a canine unit, and the canine unit bit him on the leg, leaving a laceration. And that's where the situation is right now.
So it seems like he's going to be okay, but at the same time, I don't really know how to put it. I feel like he'll be okay.
Yeah, it seems like the media no one knows the exact full story. They won't say anything, but it seems like he just was a little intoxicated, went to his in-laws, tried to get in the house, and I don't think his in-laws like him that much. So I think that's why the police got involved.
Okay, well, maybe he'll be ready for the season. Who knows? Doesn't really impact fantasy, so that's a good thing.
Still a free agent, by the way.
No, that's true. I forgot about that. I totally forgot about that. Maybe the Seahawks will take him back.
I'd still like him back, to be honest.
I don't know. He's a little washed up now.
But that's better than our defense looks right now, Brian.
Fair enough.
So continuing on, we're doing a deep dive into the divisions. We're looking at each position on each team in depth, examining trends of the offensive tendencies of each position on the team. A little bit longer episodes, loaded with information in depth, and we're trying to give a verdict on if you should want this player on your team or not. So we're starting off with the best team in the division. The Tennessee Titans went 11-5, lost to the Ravens in the wild card round. Looking at quarterback Ryan Tannehill, the running backs are Derrick Henry and friends. Wide receivers are looking at A.J. Brown, new addition in Julio Jones, new addition in Josh Reynolds. Tight end looks like Anthony Ferkser. On the year, they had the third-ranked offense and 28th ranked defense in 2020 with a very 50-50 pass-run selection, which just means they're a run-heavy team in the modern NFL. They have the 12th hardest schedule coming up, Ryan. They also have a new offensive coordinator. They promoted tight end coach Todd Downing. So Todd Downing's run through the NFL he was Derek Carr's quarterback coach during his breakout season. He was the Raiders OC when things fell apart, though, under Jack Del Rio. And he was promoted within the team for the continuity of last season's offense.
Interesting. I mean, the Tennessee Titans are by far the best team in this division. They're also a Super Bowl contending team. So, in terms of fantasy relevance, this is the team that you're probably going to want to draft the majority of your guys in this division, at least. So, I mean, the Titans just are stacked everywhere, from quarterback to running back to wide receiver. Tight end, not so much, I would say, but all the other areas, they're a well-oiled machine, I'd say.
So, the key part about finding fantasy success is high-end offense and bottom-tier defense, because it means the offense is good enough to score a lot of points, but they're bad enough where they have to keep scoring points to stay competitive in games.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So we're going to start off with quarterback Ryan Tannehill. Finished as a QB7 in 2020. Threw for 3,800 passing yards, 33 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. Added on 260 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. Averaged 30 attempts for 240 yards per game. That puts you at a base of 9.6 points per game. And since taking over the starting role for the Tennessee Titans, it's a 26-game stretch, he's the quarterback 3 in fantasy.
I've been saying this since he was a quarterback in Miami. He was pretty good when he played in Miami for a while, and then he was hurt by the injury towards ACL. Everyone kind of forgot about him, and then the Tennessee Titans gave him a chance again. And ever since he became a Titans, like you're saying, he's actually just been an absolute stud. I mean, you drafted him in fantasy last season as a pickup, and he brought you all the way to the championship, which you ended up losing, FYI. So Ryan Tannehill's not good enough to win a championship, but he's good enough to get you there. I'll go with that.
Thanks for that, Brandon. Unnecessary, but okay.
But needed.
So the thing is, he also had Adam Gase in Miami, which is a key factor of him being trash. So Tannehill basically averaged 21.9 points per game last season, had 7 games over 20 points, a high of 37, low of 10.8. Many games come down to Derrick Henry or Ryan Tannehill is more involved in the touchdown scheme. He's got the new weapon in Julio Jones. And I feel like my verdict is, even though he's being disrespected by still being in the late rounds, if you go in the late round quarterback strategy, he's got to be the first one in that group you're going for.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there is actually, surprisingly, there's actually like 10 good quarterbacks that you can draft this season for like the first time like ever. Like you can't go wrong with the top 10 quarterbacks. But if for whatever reason that you don't feel good about your quarterback, maybe you go with like Matt Stafford at the end of your draft, you go with like Joe Burrow, and like you don't feel like great about it. Like Ryan Tannehill is a pretty good add at like the end of your draft, just in case for like reassurance. If one of them goes down or one of them's having a bad season, Tannehill can step in and can be that top 5 QB potentially. And with the addition of Julio too, I mean, it just makes him even a better fantasy asset.
So when you get to draft boards and we get to the point where Ryan Tannehill's potentially leapfrogged to Joe Burrow and Matthew Stafford in drafts, would you still take him over those two, or would you lean towards one of the others?
You're saying if like, would I rather take Joe Burrow or Matthew Stafford over, or take Tannehill over those two?
Yeah.
No, I'd probably still take Burrow or Stafford just because I know that Stafford has a talent, you know, in the Rams offense. I think he's going to be elite. I think Stafford's going to be unbelievable this season. Like if you're waiting for a quarterback and you're going to go to the end of the draft for one, get Stafford. If you're stuck with Ryan Tannehill, then I mean, that's not the worst case either. Like Ryan Tannehill has proven time and time again, he's been a good fantasy player, and he can run the ball too. That's a big thing with quarterbacks, that he does sneak in those 1-yard touchdowns when it's not Derrick Henry, or he runs for like 60-yard touchdowns too. So he has that ability to be a good fantasy quarterback.
So moving on to the goal line guy, Derrick Henry and friends. I say friends because it really doesn't matter who the RB2 is in Tennessee. They don't matter. So Derrick Henry finished as the RB2 in the 17-game stretch, RB3 if you're counting 16 games, averaging 20.2 points per game, had over 2,000 rushing yards, 17 touchdowns. And the reason why everyone's always been scared of Derrick Henry is the fact that he doesn't catch the ball. He only has had 19 receptions for 114 yards. But the thing is, he averages 5.5 yards on first down. So basically the offense can do literally whatever it wants on second down because they're at like 2nd and 4, 2nd and 5, and the defense has to be worried about Derrick Henry.
Derrick Henry is... the more I see Derrick Henry, the more I'm like, why is he not the first overall pick in fantasy? And the only reason is because he can't catch the ball. But he's running for 2,000 yards, and he literally just picks up 10 yards of carry every single time. Not actually statistic-wise 10 yards of carry, but it feels like he just gets 10 yards of carry because he falls for 5 yards.
Right.
And he's just like, he's a touchdown machine. I mean, with A.J. Brown and Julio now there, they have to at least cover them, so they can't stack the box with Derrick Henry. I think he is a force again this season. Probably a top 3 running back, no doubt. It's probably going to be CMC, Dalvin, Derrick Henry. But then again, Dalvin and CMC have injury history. Derrick Henry doesn't really have an injury history because he's like 260 as a running back. So it's kind of tough to hurt that type of guy. But, I mean, Derrick Henry's just a beast. And he'll probably end up putting another 15 touchdowns, 2,000-yard season. So, I mean, definitely one of the top picks in fantasy this year.
Right. In the group of friends, you have Darrington Evans, who finished as the running back 112. Jeremy McNichols, who's the running back 82. And Brian Hill is the running back 52 from Atlanta. This guy is like, out of these 3, one of them's role will be the pass catching back. And just when Derrick Henry is too tired, they'll be on the field for one drive and then Derrick Henry will be right back in. So my verdict is you're drafting Henry in the top 3 with confidence and don't touch the other backs in that backfield.
Yeah, I mean, totally agree with that.
So now for the fun position on the Titans team, the wide receivers. Got A.J. Brown, wide receiver 11, had a 25% target share, averaged 15.7 points per game. Julio Jones coming in as the wide receiver 53, 51 receptions, 771 yards, and 3 touchdowns. His key thing is he missed 7 games. And then you have Josh Reynolds, wide receiver 64, coming over from the Rams. 52 receptions for 618 yards and 2 touchdowns. I'll let you take it away with the wide receivers, Brian.
I like A.J. Brown. I've always thought he was pretty good, but I always never felt good about having him as a wide receiver 1 or a wide receiver 2 on my team. For whatever reason, he just doesn't get the targets that he deserves, but he puts up the numbers year after year. Like from red zone targets, like he always gets all the red zone targets. He catches a ton of touchdowns. He's flashy. He's a good receiver. He was on the Ole Miss team with DK Metcalf, just a great core to begin with. So, I mean, I like A.J. Brown for sure. He's a good pick. He's a safe pick to draft. And I think that with Julio too, there's benefits and cons to it. The benefit is that a lot of shade and a lot of coverage we put on Julio this season just to try to offset it, which might open him up for, more touchdowns, more yards. But the con of it is how do you share between Julio and AJ equally? Like who's going to get more in the sense? It'll probably end up being AJ just because he's well known, doesn't really have a big injury history. He's younger. But moving over to Julio too, it's like he's been hurt so much. Everyone knows his injury history. He's an amazing receiver when healthy, but how are they going to be able to balance both Julio and AJ when you're giving Derrick Henry 35 carries a game? So it's going to be interesting to see. I like both of them still. They're going to still put up great fantasy numbers, but it's kind of tough to tell who's going to be the better one.
Yeah, for me, like when you first started the offseason, they let go of Corey Davis, they let go of Jonnu Smith, so everyone just assumed A.J. Brown is going to have this Devontae Adams-esque season where he's the only target on the team. Now you bring in Julio Jones. So, as you said, he missed 7 games. We know that he has an injury history. If you don't count last year, you don't count his rookie season. So we're talking about the 6 seasons where Julio Jones was an elite wide receiver and the guy. Averaged 161 targets per year. So that's more than A.J. Brown averaged last year. He had 106. So basically you're taking a giant reception monster, bringing him in next to A.J. Brown. I think the reality is, as you mentioned, it's going to be a situation where the defense can't cover both. But where A.J. Brown's going right now, you're basically drafting A.J. Brown at his ceiling because with Julio Jones there, you're not going to have all those targets going to A.J. Brown as people are hoping for.
And they're not small ball possession receivers. Like what I mean by that is they don't catch 5-yard catches. Like they catch 40 to 50-yard catches because the Titans are one of the best at play action because you have Derrick Henry run the rock 5-6 yards, you stack the box, next thing you know they run a play action. AJ Brown's downfield, it's at least they don't have anyone else. No, they have Julio Jones now and they can just lob it up to him. So they're going to be catching 60, 70-yard touchdowns a season. You're going to expect it more than once, which makes Ryan Tannehill a little bit better, makes AJ Brown a little bit better, and makes Julio better too. So it's really tough to see who's going to have the target share, but I think they should have a fair amount for the both of them.
And Josh Reynolds, he's just going to be my verdict right now is you're going to be ignoring Josh Reynolds the entire time. Drafting A.J. Brown, knowing that Julio Jones does cap his ceiling. And I would draft Julio knowing his injury, though. But I think if you're a team where you start off with 2 running backs, you can't get that 3rd running back. Julio Jones would be the perfect wide receiver 2 on a fantasy team.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, Julio, just depending on his injuries, he gets injured every season. You have to expect that. But if he puts up a full healthy season, he could put up some serious numbers.
Moving on to the last position on this team, tight end, Anthony Firkser. He was a tight end 30 last year behind Jonnu Smith. He got 11% of Tannehill's targets, which accounted for 39 receptions for 387 yards and a touchdown. His best game was 8 receptions for 113 yards and 1 touchdown, and that was about it for Anthony Firkser.
Yeah, I mean, he's just not appealing.
Yeah.
He is a starting tight end on a good offense now, which is somewhat appealing, but he's not really a relevant fantasy tight end. I would say you can maybe stream him for like a really bad week where they're playing like someone terrible and hope he catches a touchdown. But other than that, I don't think he's catching more than 4 touchdowns in the season. I don't even think he surpasses like 500 yards.
Right, because Jonnu finished as a tight end, I think 10 last year, had 14% of those targets. I just think with how many targets Julio Jones is going to be demanding, that the assumption that all of Jonnu's targets will go to Firkser is just, it's not going to happen. Maybe he gets like some percentage of that where he becomes like, as you said, a potential streamer each week, but it's not someone you're going to want to draft.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't draft him. I mean, again, stream week by week, but don't get too caught up in that offense because Firkser is really not that good.
No, he's going to be someone that the people who aren't really paying attention to the fantasy, they just see that he's the next man up on the list might draft, but people who are paying attention know not to draft him.
Yeah, correct.
Next team on the list, we got the Indianapolis Colts, who also finished 11-5, had a very close wild card loss to the Bills. At quarterback, we're looking at Carson Wentz. Right behind him under center is Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines, our running back. Not to mention Marlon Mack is back. Wide receiver, we got a mix of Michael Pittman Jr., T.Y. Hilton, Zach Pascal, and Paris Campbell. For tight ends, we got Mo Cox and Jack Doyle. They were the 10th ranked offense and 8th ranked defense in 2020. Got a new quarterback though. They had a 55-45 pass run split. They have the 9th easiest schedule going into 2021.
I feel good about the Colts actually coming into the season. I don't think they can beat the Titans in that division, but I think they'll make a run for their money. I think that Carson Wentz does have a comeback season. I think Carson Wentz actually can be very good this season to put in there. They have a great running back group with all of them. I mean, some of them are okay, and some of them are talented. Yeah, I mean, we'll go into that a little bit later. But I mean, their wide receivers are definitely probably where they're lacking the most, which kind of hurts Carson Wentz in a way. But I think that Carson Wentz did have a talent. He was going to be an MVP quarterback. Nick Foles decided to steal the shine light, and he ended up winning a Super Bowl.
Well, he got hurt. That's not his fault.
Yeah, I know, but maybe you shouldn't have ran the ball on the 1 yard line when you should have just probably dumped it off or gave it to your running back or something like that. It was not the brightest move by him. But anyways, Carson Wentz has the talent. I think it's a great place for him to rebirth his career. And I think with their elite defense and the 9th easiest schedule in the NFL, they should be able to put up some type of fantasy relevance this season.
Not to mention one of the best offensive lines in football.
Not to mention one of the best offensive lines in football as well.
So diving into Carson Wentz a little bit more. Last year on the Eagles, he finished as the quarterback 22. He missed the last 4 weeks because the team benched him from Jalen Hurts. In his 12-game stretch, he had 2,600 passing yards, 16 touchdowns to 15 interceptions, which is just terrible. He had also added about 280 rushing yards for 5 touchdowns, which made up for some of those interception-heavy games. He averaged about 36 attempts for 220 yards, which gives you a base of 8.8 points. But his average for the season was 17.7, which doesn't sound terrible, but it's not enough to really win you that game.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I feel like Carson Wentz is that guy that he may be like elite in an all-star. He might be like a great fantasy quarterback, but the expectations going to the season is that he's that guy that threw 16 touchdowns and 15 interceptions. So you should probably expect that going into the season. However, if you draft him late in a draft and you don't really have a great quarterback and you want to take him as just a risk or even pick him up in free agency, wherever he might go, he could be a potential stud if the Colts are actually very good this season, which I think they will be. But then again, it's also Carson Wentz. He makes a lot of dumb throws. He makes a lot of dumb decisions. Hopefully the coach maybe smartens him up a little bit and he has a pretty good comeback season.
So speaking of the coach he's going to is Frank Reich, who was his offensive coordinator when he was with the Eagles for 2 years. That's when he had his MVP caliber season. He was averaging 21.3 points per game as a quarterback too until he got hurt. And honestly, the entire Eagles team just fell apart once Reich left for the Colts. With Reich at the helm of the offense of the Colts, when he had Andrew Luck finished as the quarterback 5 in 2018. Then Luck retires and Jacoby Brissett is forced into the starting role, who only managed the quarterback 24. Philip Rivers was then the quarterback 20 in 2020. It's a lot of 20s. So basically the question is, can Carson Wentz recapture the MVP magic in Indianapolis with the coach that brought him to the MVP level? As you mentioned, there's a lot of things that will go Carson Wentz's way. It's just basically, can Carson Wentz mentally recover from his disastrous years with the Eagles?
Yeah, I mean, it just don't expect a lot from him, but he's got a high ceiling, I guess. You could expect him to do well, but you should also expect him to do very bad as well. So it's tough to see what Carson Wentz is going to do. I believe in him personally. I think he'll have a good season, but there's a lot of people out there who don't think he will. So choose as you will.
So my verdict is, you're drafting him super late as maybe like the second quarterback on your roster if you don't feel comfortable with your first quarterback. Honestly, I think it would be, if you take Jalen Hurts in the 7th or 8th round and you're kind of like worried about what Jalen Hurts might be, I would throw Carson Wentz on my bench, because Carson Wentz opens with Seattle and then the Rams, which are going to have the Rams have a great defense that might eat him alive, but then he opens his third game with Tennessee. If you don't like how Jalen Hurts is doing, Carson Wentz versus Tennessee could be a good game because they have a terrible defense, as we just talked about.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Now, the reason why I picked the AFC South is because I really love how much you hate their running back on the Colts. So the Colts running back room is Jonathan Taylor and Nyheim Hines, and in little parentheses, Marlon Mack, because everyone's kind of forgetting about him. But he's not like this third down back that doesn't matter. Marlon Mack is a legit running back in the Colts room. So Jonathan Taylor finished 2020 as a running back 6, 1,100 rushing yards and 11 touchdowns, 36 receptions for 300 yards and 1 touchdown. I'll let you say what you want to say about Jonathan Taylor before we dive into how his season actually went.
Okay, Jonathan Taylor, let me just clarify. He's talented. He's a good running back. I just do not see why he's being drafted so high in fantasy when he has Marlon Mack and Nyheim Hines behind them. And year after year, if you watch the Colts and know they run all 3 running backs, they just do it all the time. So I don't understand. The workload's not there for Jonathan Taylor. Maybe they surprise me this season and they only go with Jonathan Taylor, but they're still going to run Marlon Mack. I know they will. They're still going to use Nyheim Hines. And it's just not leaving enough workload for Jonathan Taylor. When you draft fantasy running backs, you look for talent, and you look for who are the guys that get the most workloads. It's like Mike Davis this season. No one's behind him in the Atlanta's offense. He's not that great. However, you're going to take him because he has a high workload. Jonathan Taylor, good running back, but he doesn't have the workload. It's just, I don't understand where the two are coming together, but that's why I'm just not going to draft Jonathan Taylor this season.
So Jonathan Taylor had a tale of 2 seasons last year. Very, very similar to how David Montgomery finished his season last year. So in the first 12 games, Jonathan Taylor averaged 9.1 points per game. And if you had Jonathan Taylor on your team, you most likely didn't make playoffs with that performance. He only had 4 touchdowns throughout the first 12 weeks, which is just, it will crush your team if you're depending on him.
Example A.
His last 5 games, he averaged 25 points per game. On that game pace, he would have ended the year with 2,080 yards and 25 touchdowns. He basically was averaging 130 yards, 2 receptions and 14 yards, and 1.6 touchdowns per game.
Who'd they play?
Exactly, so that's what I'm about to get into. Because I really is just like, why are people so high on Jonathan Taylor? So 3 of those last 5 games were against the bottom 3 defenses of the league. 2 versus the Texans, who were the 3rd worst. 1 game versus the Raiders, who were the 8th worst. And 1 game versus the Steelers, who were the 3rd best. He still had a decent game because he managed to get into the end zone. But the game everyone's hung up on was against the 2nd worst rushing defense in the NFL, the Jacksonville Jaguars, where he totaled up 254 yards and 2 touchdowns. So in everyone's mind, Jonathan Taylor had this amazing end to his year. But if he was your fantasy running back, he most likely didn't make playoffs.
Yes, correct. Again, John Taylor has the ability to be good. He does. 254 yards against a terrible defense. I mean, not a lot of running backs can do that even against a bad defense, so you got to give him a little respect there. It's just the workload is just so question mark this season. It's like he's going to be taken as the 6th running back off the board. Like, there's just so many question marks in between. If you take Jonathan Taylor, there's a lot of people out there who think he could be the number 1 overall running back in the league. Clearly, they don't know enough about fantasy football. However, if you want to take Jonathan Taylor, take him. All I'm saying is you're better off taking someone like Austin Eckler, who I also think is going to be an absolute monster this season.
Right, so my verdict is I'm unsure because he's so talented, but I'm not willing to take him at the running back 6 or higher. Now let me play a little game with you, Brian.
Let's hear it.
So here are the guys going after Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor or Nick Chubb?
See, I don't like Nick Chubb either because I think that Kareem Hunt, I think they have the same thing. I think they both have the workload issue. I think Kareem Hunt takes a bigger workload this season. I know, I'm getting into it. However, I mean, I would probably... that's a tough one, really. I mean, I would probably take Jonathan Taylor, and I would not feel good about it whatsoever. Because I also think Nick Chubb's in a worse situation with Kareem Hunt taking more of a workload than Nyheim Hines and Marlon Mack.
Because JT is at 6, Nick Chubb is at 7.
Yeah, I think both of those. I will take, if I have that pick in the draft where I have the decision to take Jonathan Taylor or Nick Chubb, I will probably end up going either like a Travis Kelce or like a Tyreek Hill instead.
Okay, what about Jonathan Taylor or Zeke Elliott?
I take Zeke Elliott 100%. Zeke Elliott is clear cut. I mean, Tony Pollard is there, but I think with Dak coming back, that offense is going to be rolling this season. I think Zeke has a great comeback season. He's going to be a monster.
Jonathan Taylor or Austin Eckler?
Austin Eckler, 100% all day. I think Austin Eckler could be the RB1 fantasy this season.
Jonathan Taylor or Cam Akers?
Jonathan Taylor. I like Cam Akers, though. I do like Cam Akers, but if you take Cam Akers instead of Jonathan Taylor, you'll be laughed at in drafts. So it's almost like you have to take Jonathan Taylor because it's the right thing to do.
Okay, last one. Jonathan Taylor or Joe Mixon?
I mean, again, it's the same thing. I believe Joe Mixon will be better, but you'll be laughed at if you take Joe Mixon over Jonathan Taylor. It's a terrible situation to be in. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
You don't feel good about taking Jonathan Taylor, but you have to take Jonathan Taylor. That's where you're at.
All right, so we got, to really just explain this whole point, we got to talk about the other two backs for a little bit. So Nyheim Hines finished as the running back 20 in 2020. It's the pass-catching back, 380 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. But he had 63 receptions for 482 yards and 4 touchdowns. Averaged 10.1 points per game. And this is because Phillip Rivers is a check-down king. Since he can't scramble, anytime he feels the pressure, he's just going to dump it off to Nyheim Hines. And that's why Nyheim Hines is so high in people's minds. And one of the reasons why you can't really trust Jonathan Taylor to take all the receiving work for the backfield. We also have Marlon Mack, who lost 2020 due to an Achilles injury in week 1. In 2019, he's the running back 20, over 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns. So the thing is, Jonathan Taylor, very talented, but if you have another 1,000-yard back in your backfield, he's going to get the ball.
100%. He's going to get the ball. He's going to get his carries. I mean, he's not going to get as many carries as Jonathan Taylor. Jonathan Taylor would go in. They're going to have a third down back. There might be a drive where Jonathan Taylor takes a seat because he didn't have a good drive. They throw in Marlon Mack. They mix and match and keep going around. It's what the Colts do. The Colts have been doing it for 10 years. If you don't watch football, then here's your sign to know that the Colts just use every single piece in their backfield every time.
Right, so my verdict on these two guys is Hines is a really interesting late-round pick right now, but Carson Wentz does not have the history of dumping off to the running back. Even during his best season when he had a mixed bag running backs. No one really stood out. This was a Jay Ajayi season. Garrett Blunt was his running back. Had Darren Sproles, who got injured in the beginning of the season, so he didn't have a true pass catcher. And he also had no pass catcher in Miles Sanders. So it's hard
he just drops balls left and right. So
it's if you want to give Carson Wentz the benefit of the doubt, but he just doesn't have the history of throwing to his running back, then Mac will be annoying because he's going to siphon enough work where you're going to be upset if you have Jonathan Taylor, but he's not going to get enough work where you're going to have confidence starting Marlon Mack.
I agree with that.
So mine is you can draft Hines, but I'm not going to draft either, in my opinion.
Yeah, I wouldn't draft Mack or Hines either because Jonathan Taylor is the golden child in this fantasy football season. So if he's the RB1 this season, I'm sorry. That's everything I've said about Jonathan Taylor, but I'm just letting you know right now, the fantasy force here, you're going to be in for a rude awakening when he's not.
Letting you know that right now, Matt Katsunas. So wide receivers, we got T.Y. Hilton, Michael Pittman Jr., Paris Campbell, and Zach Pascal. So it doesn't look good when your best wide receiver finished as the wide receiver of 40 last year. T.Y. Hilton had a 17% target market share. Michael Pittman Jr., wide receiver 81 last year with a 13% market share. Paris Campbell, wide receiver 169. He missed the entire season last year, that's why. Zach Pascal, wide receiver 56, 13% target market share. I'll let you pick which wide receiver we want to dive into first.
I mean, I could say it as a whole. I mean, Ty, one, is just old. He's kind of washed up. It's not really fantasy relevant anymore. I mean, maybe Carson Wentz will get him a ball here and there. Okay, here it is. T.Y. Hilton plays the Texans. You start him every single time. For whatever reason, when he plays the Texans, he goes for like 202 every time. Every other team, he's not even relevant. Michael Pittman, I think, is good. He's a good rookie, or he was a good rookie. And he's coming in as, a young guy who's going to be probably a pretty big focal point in the offense. So I say that, the only fantasy relevant receiver here is definitely Michael Pittman, just to the upside with Carson Wentz coming in. Actually has a guy who can throw him the ball. Might get a lot of targets, who knows? But Paris Campbell and Zach Pascal, just not fantasy relevant whatsoever.
So the funny thing about T.Y. Hilton is his average seems confusing because 9.1 points per game doesn't sound terrible. He had 56 receptions for 760 yards and 5 touchdowns. 47% of his season production came in a 3-week span.
Twice against the Texans.
The rest of the year, he averaged 4.2 points per game, and people were taking him in the 5th round, so he killed your fantasy season if you took him.
Yeah, he's just not fantasy relevant anymore.
The rest of the wide receivers, if you want to take a long shot, you can take Michael Pittman in the 10th or 11th round. The other two, they're going to be sitting there in the stream, and you're going to have to wait for a breakout game before trusting one of them.
Agreed.
So a little bit more fun position for the Colts, the tight ends. Got Jack Doyle and big old Mo Alley Cox. So Trey Burton is God, who had 10% of the market. So Mo Alley Cox, tight end 29, 7% of the target share, 6'5", 270 pounds, but looks like he's 7'5". 31 receptions for 394 yards and 2 touchdowns. Not the numbers you wish for Mo Alley Cox. Average only 3.5 points per game. Then you had Jack Doyle, tight end 39, 6% of the market, average 3.8 points per game. 23 receptions, 250 yards, 3 touchdowns. Neither of those guys are anything to get excited about. My verdict on both of these dudes would be you're not going to draft either. They're going to be low-end streamers until one of them proves us otherwise.
Yeah, I feel like the Colts tight ends year after year, they hype them up so much because they're like, oh, they're going to be good. Trust me, they got a good offensive scheme going around their tight ends, and then
they got a quarterback that likes them. It just doesn't happen.
It's literally been decreasing year after year. It's like, do not draft these tight ends because they will do nothing for you.
Speaking of a team that's going to do nothing for you, Brian, the Houston Texans. Coming in at 4-12, missed playoffs, if you weren't aware. Right now, the quarterback is Tyrod Taylor. There's been no news on Deshaun Watson's current situation. If you know anything about football, you kind of know what's going on. He basically has a bunch of allegations against him. He also still doesn't want to be on the team, even with those allegations against him. So that's
something.
Yeah. So the running back room is David Johnson. And then literally a mixed bag of old veteran running backs. Mark Ingram, Philip Lindsay, Rex Burkhead. Wide receivers, Brandon Cooks, Randall Cobb, Kiki Kuti, tight end, Jordan Atkins. They're the 13th best offense and 30th ranked defense in 2020. A 64-36 pass run split. So being the 13th best offense and 30th ranked defense would mean fantasy gold for that offense. But Deshaun Watson's not there anymore.
If Deshaun Watson was there, this is a pretty good team. I'm not going to lie. Yeah. I mean, David Johnson, Mark Ingram, Philip Lindsay, Rex Burkhead, that's a loaded backfield just to begin with. But they don't have anyone to throw the ball and offset it, so they're just going to stack the box the whole game. I mean, Brandon Cooks is okay. Randall Cobb is okay, kind of washed up now. Kiki QT had some light last year, but not really that fancy relevant. So, I mean, the Texans are going to struggle this year for sure. I think that they're probably not going to be as bad as the Lions. I think the Lions still hold the crown for the worst team in the NFL, but they're pretty close after that.
So they have the 16th easiest schedule, which basically means they're right in the middle of the pack for strength going to 2021. New head coach, though, David Culley. Do you know where he just came from?
Baltimore.
And did you know that they were last in the league when it came to passing?
Yeah, that says a lot right there. So that's not a good sign.
I think it's mainly they were last in the league because of passing, not because of the coach, but because of
Lamar Jackson.
Who
can't throw the ball.
Right. But he can throw the ball enough to be so quarterback.
I mean, amazing fantasy quarterback just for his running ability, but passing, it's always a question mark.
So previously, David Culley worked with Andy Reid for 16 years on the Chiefs and the Eagles. So it's not like you got a guy who knows nothing about passing coming over. He's worked with one of the best passing, offensive-minded guys in the league. So it's not like he's coming over from the Ravens and is going to destroy the Texans. I have the faith that he knows what he's doing. He just might not have the pieces to be able to accomplish it in 2021.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if Rodgers even exercised the idea of going to the Texans. They might be a decent team, honestly, because they got a good backfield. Their receivers need a little bit more work, but I mean, they could probably pull some strings together and make a pretty decent team.
I just think that Aaron Rodgers has a better chance with the Packers than he does with the Texans.
Oh, yes, and there's no other team in the league that he has a better chance with than the Packers. So he'll probably end up going back to the Packers, but it's still TBD. We still don't know that.
So the quarterback for the Texans, Brian, Tyrod Taylor, missed 2020 due to getting a punctured lung that thrusted Justin Herbert into the starting role, and he never got it back as Justin Herbert lit up the league his rookie season. So I had to go back to Tyrod Taylor's last year as a full-time starter was 2017, so 4 seasons ago. He finished as the quarterback 16 with the Buffalo Bills when the Bills was the first time making playoffs in the modern era.
Shout out Andy Dalton.
Yep. 2,800 passing yards, 14 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions for Tyrod that season. He was being the quarterback 16, that's not great. Only averaged 14.8 points per game. He did have the rushing ability, but not enough where it makes up. He averaged 28 attempts for 190 yards, which is 7.5 points per game. And he only targeted the running back about 5 times per game, 4.8. His running back was LaShawn McCoy, and McCoy was still an elite running back. Since then, he lost the starting job to Baker Mayfield in Cleveland in 2018, and then backed up Rivers when he was still a Charger in 2019. How do you feel about Tyrod Taylor?
He wants to be Ryan Fitzpatrick, but he keeps getting screwed over by injuries and having quarterbacks above him on every team. I mean, I do like Tyrod Taylor because he does have talent to run the ball, and he's not that bad, but I think with the injuries and being a backup for so long, it's kind of putting a damper on his career, and just it's going to show that he's just not. I don't think he's ready to take on a team. He's just not there anymore.
My friend, you're just not going to draft Tyrod Taylor at all this season.
He's just not. He's going to be in free agents with like 5%. I mean, maybe. I mean, if for one game and he plays, the Titans or something like that, maybe you can pick him up and stream him, but that's really about it.
Tyrod Taylor will only be on a team if it's a super flex or a 2-quarterback league.
That'd be so funny if you look back at this and the Texans won like 12 games and we're just like, okay, Tyrod Taylor is good. They're not going to. But
it's like if they had like an elite defense in Tyrod Taylor, maybe. But
just imagine. I mean, it's definitely not, but just imagine.
So speaking of one of the few redeeming factors on their team, the running back room is David Johnson and a group of his old-timey friends. So David Johnson finished as running back 19 last year while missing 4 games. Basically 700 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns, 33 receptions for 315 yards, 2 touchdowns. Averaged 13.6 points per game, which is the definition of the perfect running back 2.
Yeah, David Johnson is probably David RB2 Johnson. He's been like that for the last 3 seasons. He was a stud. I liked him when he was in the Cardinals. He had a great season, but ever since that great season, he has just been going down and down and down.
He's just always played by injuries after that one season.
Yeah, always played by injuries, but he's solid enough to where he gets the workload. And then it's kind of the point where they have a loaded backfield. It's like, I don't even know if I could trust David Johnson drafting this season. It's not going to feel good, but you might have to do it because the running backs do get pretty terrible as you go down lower and lower.
So in his group of friends, we listed them earlier: Mark Ingram, Philip Lindsay, Rex Burkhead. Who's the youngest running back on the team?
Philip Lindsay.
How old is he?
28. No, yeah. 28?
Yes.
Wow, what a guess.
So most running backs fall off a cliff after 26, 27. So Philip Lindsay is the youngest running back at 28.
Yeah, he's an undrafted free agent. I think he came in the league when he was 25 or something like that, because he was a miracle story that he worked his way up from being undrafted, and then he came up and he was 24, 25 with the Broncos, and now he's here 28 on a loaded backfield where he probably will see 2 carries a game.
So Mark Ingram last year is the running back 72. Came over from the Ravens with the new head coach, mainly just because the new head coach needs someone to hype him up in the locker room. He was irrelevant in 2020. He had 1 game where he went 9 for 55 and 1 touchdown, and that was literally it. Philip Lindsay, running back 65, missed 5 games, only had 2 weeks over 10 fantasy points, won a 100-yard game versus the New England Patriots. And then they have Rex Burkhead, who came over from the Patriots, who was the running back 44, had 3 games over 10 points, and had 1 game When they played the Raiders, we had 27 points for 99 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Sounds like only one Super Bowl caliber running back in there, and that's Rex Burkhead. I think Rex Burkhead could be the guy to draft this season.
So my verdict is Johnson will be a low-end RB2 this season, mainly just because the defense won't be as scared as Tyrod Taylor, so I think they're going to stack the box a little bit more than they did last year. And just don't draft any of the other running backs in that room. I'd be surprised if all 4 of them are there to start the season.
Yeah, I'd be surprised too.
Wide receivers. Still doesn't look good for the Texans. We got Brandon Cooks, wide receiver 16 last season. Had a 21% target share, averaged 10.1 points per game. Randall Cobb, blast from the past, a wide receiver 79, 14% target share. Kiki Kuti, the what could have been story, wide receiver 92, 19% target share. How do you feel about these wide receivers?
Brandon Cooks, and that's really about it. I mean, Brandon Cooks does have the talent, but doesn't have the talent from the quarterback. Sean Watson steps in. Brandon Cooks is actually really good. Kiki Kuti actually might be pretty good. Tyrod Taylor, probably not anymore. I mean, I think Brandon Cooks, could be like a late round streamer at best, but it's like you shouldn't expect a lot from him. However, he is in wide receiver 1, that offense. He will see targets. It's like almost like you kind of have to draft him.
So if I'm Brandon Cooks and the Texans don't have any blackmail against me, why haven't I asked for a trade yet?
Yeah, I don't understand that either. I think he's still concussed from a Super Bowl, so he doesn't really know where he is. And he still thinks Sean Watson is quarterback, so that's probably what it is. But yeah, I mean, Cooks is just, he's also another Ryan Fitzpatrick. He's been on so many football teams that he doesn't even know what's going on at this point.
And he's like the same age as us. Like he is the oldest 26-year-old in the league.
He's good. He is good, and he's fast, but he's young, but it's just, year after year, he's just getting worse and worse and worse. And not talent-wise, but his teams are just getting worse as time goes on.
So to speak of a position that also is going to be pointless, we have the tight end 27 last year, Jordan Atkins. Averaged 5 points per game, 37 receptions for 403 yards and 1 touchdown. That was with Deshaun Watson. I don't care how much of an improvement he could have had this past season. Don't draft him. He's even a low-end streamer to begin with. I don't even think I can think of a situation where I'd want to stream Jordan Atkins.
Yeah, no, I don't even think he's on. If you go to fantasy football and you create a list for rankings, and some of them don't even have all the wide receivers on it, and some of them don't even have the tight ends on it, I don't even think he's going to make that tight end list. That's how bad he is.
Like, he wouldn't even crack like a top, like even like a sneaky sleeper kind of pick. He still's not going to be on that.
Yeah, no, just don't draft him.
Bringing up the end of the AFC South, Bryan, is the Jacksonville Jaguars, who did start out the season undefeated at 1-0 against the Colts, who made the playoffs, but then proceeded to lose the next 15 straight and missing playoffs, the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Minshew Magic, that's what it was.
Minshew Magic for week 1.
Yeah, for week 1. I mean, Jags are going to be interesting this season. I think they're definitely better than the 1-15 Jacksonville Jaguars that they were last season, just with the addition of Trevor Lawrence, Travis Etienne, comeback of James Robinson. I think they got Marvin Jones too, and they got a pretty good wide receiver core. So it's going to be interesting to see how good they are. I don't think their defense is gotten any better. So I think their defense still sucks, which is going to make them, not that great of a team. But their offense has improved significantly.
You forgot about the most impactful free agent signing, Bryan.
Tim Tebow.
Will
he even be on the team when the start of the season? Who knows?
See. Well, I mean, do you name their starting tight end without looking at the screen?
I couldn't tell you.
Okay, exactly. So quarterback, even though they like to play games right now, it's Trevor Lawrence. Running backs, James Robinson, Travis Etienne. Wide receiver room, DJ Chark, Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault. Tight end is Chris Manhertz.
Oh.
Exactly, yeah. And in parentheses, Tim Tebow. They have the 28th ranked offense and the 31st ranked defense. New quarterback, 15th easiest schedule for 2021. New head coach, Urban Meyer. Former coach at Ohio State, Florida, Utah, Bowling Green. 3 career national championships. And runs a spread-style offense, which is huge for wide receivers, and RPOs, which is a run-pass option. I know you know this, Bryan, but for people who don't know what an RPO is, it's the kind of play where it's set up where the quarterback can instantly decide if he wants to throw the ball or hand it off, which seems super complicated, but it's a really great way to take advantage of linebackers because they don't know what's going to happen because they're just used to running towards the ball.
Correct.
So quarterback Trevor Lawrence. I'll let you talk about him because you're more of the college football guy between the two of us.
Yeah, I mean, Trevor Lawrence is undoubtedly the best player coming out of this draft. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is pretty much the comparison of LeBron James coming into the NFL, and he has very, very high expectations. The number one pick in the draft, was an absolute monster at Clemson. He's only lost like 3 or 4 games his entire career, like leading back to high school, which is just insane. So he's a winning, true quarterback. He's got all the talent in the world. He can run the ball, he can pass the ball, and he's also just a really smart quarterback and doesn't make dumb decisions. He's just got everything you look for at a quarterback. So expect big things from Trevor Lawrence. I don't know fantasy-wise if he's going to be as good as you think he's going to be just because he has all his talent. Because, I mean, his team's not that great this year. It's going to be his first true test to, all right, I had great teams growing up. Now I'm playing with this terrible team. Can I lead them to a winning organization? It's going to be interesting to see. However, I mean, you could take a risk at the end of the draft. Could be really good, but he could also disappoint you as well.
So Urban Meyer is installing an offensive system similar to his college system, which is going to be easier for Trevor Lawrence to make that transition. He's projected for 4,100 passing yards and 25 touchdowns, with maybe 340 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns, just because people really don't know what the Jaguars are going to do. So with those numbers, it sounds like he's going to do really well, but this is a 17-game season now. They're going to predict that he's going to average about 16 points per game, which would put him at the quarterback 20. So for me, like, there's going to be a lot of hype for Trevor Lawrence. I'm not going to draft him. I see him as a streamer until he really makes that breakout like maybe Justin Herbert did last year.
He'll go in every draft. Someone will take him at the end of the draft, like last pick. So, but if he is in your free agents, like, and you have a guy that you don't feel good about, drop him and pick up Trevor Lawrence because he could prove people wrong, could be a pretty good quarterback.
So going into proving people wrong, we're going to talk about the running back room because everyone in the world thought the Jaguars were just going to stick with James Robinson, who finished as the running back 7 last year.
Disrespect.
And then they said, you know what? We have this free spot. We have a good running back. What should we do in the draft? We'll take another running back in the first round, which was Travis Etienne. So James Robinson had 1,000 rushing yards last year, 7 rushing touchdowns, 49 receptions for 344 yards and 3 touchdowns, averaged 16.1 points per game, but then they drafted Travis Etienne, who was Trevor Lawrence's college running back, so I understand the connection. Do you want to talk about Travis Etienne?
Yeah, I mean, Travis Etienne's a beast. He's like getting compared to someone like Alvin Kamara. He's only gotten bigger in the offseason too, so my expectation of him is that he's going to be a really good running back for a winning football team. I don't think he's going to be a really good running back for fantasy purposes because you also have James Robinson there too. I think probably Travis Etienne does end up taking over as more of the guy in the Jaguars offense solely because Trevor Lawrence feels comfortable with Travis Etienne. They played together in college for all 4 years. I mean, he's an absolute monster, but James Robinson is also a monster as well. So it's a tough situation to be. It's like I said at the beginning of the episode, or when I was talking about Jonathan Taylor, they both have so much talent, but the workload is just not there, and that's why I don't feel comfortable drafting either of them in fantasy.
Because here's the biggest problem is Etienne's a 3rd down back, like a 3-down back. But the Jaguars have said, oh, he's only going to be the pass-catching 3rd down back when everyone knows he could easily just take over. They've also said they're going to give James Robinson the chance to be the main starter, to be the 1-2 down back. But it's just like, it's one of those situations where if James Robinson has a bad game, Travis Etienne can just take over, but it's going to be hard to predict at what point of the season that could be. So where they're going both in drafts, I'm avoiding both because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't want to deal with having the situation where I pick a guy and he doesn't get the workload that I'm expecting him to.
Exactly. I'm the same way.
So speaking of workload, we're going to the wide receiver room. We got DJ Chark, Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault. So I know I was super high on DJ Chark last year. I believe in his talent. It's just he was playing the year hurt, and they just were a bad team last year. Had a good start to his season. Basically, DJ Chark's rise to fame was the beginning of his rookie season where he just blew up, caught a touchdown every single game. Last year, it didn't quite happen. Finished as the wide receiver 49, 18% of the target share, averaged 7.7 points per game, 53 receptions, 706 yards, 5 touchdowns, missed the 3 games and played injured. Laviska Shenault, rookie sensation. Wide receiver 47, unfortunately, because he's on the Jaguars. 14% target share, averaged 9.2 points per game. Then Marvin Jones, coming in from the Lions, finished the year as the wide receiver 17, mainly because Kenny Golladay got hurt, so he was forced into the wide receiver 1 role. 76 receptions, 978 yards, 9 touchdowns. But the problem is, new rookie quarterbacks typically can't support like most fantasy relevant wide receivers. New offense. I don't really know what to make of this whole situation. What do you feel like, Brian?
I think they're all a bunch of average wide receivers. I was never a DJ Chark fan before the season started. However, I am giving him a little bit of bump in his draft stock solely because he has a better quarterback this season. He does have the talent, but has never really proven himself. So I'm probably not going to draft any of these guys. I've never really drafted Jaguars wide receivers in the past. Probably not planning on to do it this draft as well. However, if you do take a Jaguars receiver, the only pro that you do have is that you have Trevor Lawrence now and could make one of these receivers like a stud in fantasy.
So the offense they're going to be in, a spread offense, is typically 4 wide receivers to basically create mismatches, forcing linebackers to cover guys that are faster than them. And then because of that, it creates a mismatch with offensive linemen, running back, quarterback, and there's not enough defensive guys to really cover that. The problem is, I feel like spread offenses have never truly succeeded in the NFL yet. Some teams have managed to pull it off. It's just if you're going to go to a 4 wide receiver system, even though there's definitely varying talent levels, until I see how that team plays, I can't spend a 7th round pick on DJ Chark. The only person I'm comfortable with taking is Marvin Jones in like the 10th round to see what happens.
I'm the same way. I think Marvin Jones is a guy you probably do want to have. I think they paid him the money to come in there and be the guy in that offense. But DJ Chark is also a question mark, so I wouldn't feel good about drafting him, especially with how high DJ Chark's going.
Now to round up the last guy we have to talk about, tight end Chris Manhertz, who's a tight end 84 last year. He does have the size. He's 6'6", 255. Last year only had 6 receptions for 52 yards. The highlight of the offseason has been Tim Tebow has signed as a tight end with the Jaguars. This is because this is a friends with the head coach signing. Tim Tebow has 0 career receptions, hasn't been on a regular season roster since 2012. He was the quarterback for Urban Meyer on the Florida championship team, but my favorite side about Tim Tebow is that he has more playoff wins than Matthew Stafford.
That is funny. He does. He's a true winner. It's God led him to the playoff victories. He's got a winning mentality. He played baseball for a little bit. Now he's back. He's trying to make something out of his football career.
It's really just a attention signing. Like, Tim Tebow should not be on this roster come the season time, but with how poor their tight end room is, he could easily sneak on as like practice squad or like tight end 3.
If I went down to Jacksonville and I asked Jacksonville Jaguar fans on the side of the street who their tight end for the season other than Tim Tebow is, they probably couldn't even name who Chris Manhertz is.
They would have no idea.
I have no idea.
So that's the point, is Tim Tebow could make a roster just because he's friends with the coach. And that kind of wraps up our AFC South breakdown. As always, pay attention to the news, keep up to date. Focus on the news that's important. Don't run with the headlines. Read into the article. It's going to be a lot of coach speak, a lot of hyping up players that coaches are either want to hype up because they either drafted them or they just signed them to a contract, so they want to make it look like they made the right decision. So you just got to weed through, really figure out what's going on. Any last remarks, Brian?
One of the worst divisions in football, but some of the other divisions will get a lot better, I promise.
Okay. Cheers.
Cheers.